Hi everyone, Jake here from Fulfill. Today I'm talking with the Fundraising Manager from the Asylum Seeker Resource Centre, Alan White. Alan, welcome.
Hello.
Also just recently became the FIA Australian Young Fundraiser of the Year. Congratulations.
That's right. Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, so how did you start in fundraising?
Yeah, it's a question that I get asked by a range of people because I'm what I'd call a career fundraiser. So someone who's worked and lived in the profession since the time I left university, or in my case, actually, while I was at university. So for me, I started in the profession in a really interesting way in the sense that I didn't really understand philanthropy, but at the time when I was at university, I didn't really like it either. How it came about was that while at university, I was involved in student politics and student groups and was studying and working at the university at the same time. And what happened was being a university that was built on the worth and the value of private donations, being a private university, it meant that philanthropy was actually integral to who and what our university was. But the university, as it grew, realised that it needed to engage alumni and it needed to engage students as they were leaving university to educate them on what philanthropy meant and the value and importance of it. Not so much, how large a donation might be, but the value of any donation. And so a group called the Student Philanthropy Council, later known as the Philanthropy Council, was founded. And I was intrigued by it, being in student groups myself at the time. But to be really honest with you, and with the greatest amount of respect to the people that founded it, it probably wasn't intrinsically linked with who I was. And I didn't really like their approach, or probably better to say that their approach made me a little bit uncomfortable. Coming from a family where philanthropy and donations is a big set of who we are, it makes up our value set, and we're very altruistic. I had a really good understanding of what philanthropy was, but I just felt uncomfortable with how they were doing it. So fast forward maybe 9 months to a year, and I'd continued to have these discussions and say that I didn't like this or I didn't like that, or I just felt their approach wasn't the right way to go about it. And I had a mentor at the time, and mentors are obviously a really important thing to have. And I remember when the position of leading this philanthropy movement came up, at the time, still just a volunteer role. She said, well, to be honest, if you think you don't like it and you think you can do better, why don't you show them that you can do better and you can take it in a different direction that is, more engaged and successful and meets its objectives. So essentially, shut up and give it a crack. And that's what I did. And I would say that was the start of my philanthropic journey and a journey as a fundraiser. It taught me so much. It changed my viewpoint dramatically. It actually shifted the momentum of what I was studying, where I wanted my career to go, who I wanted to be. And so I'm actually really grateful to that mentor and grateful for the opportunity. That's how it all started.
So I've worked with you before, Alan.
Yep.
And I think it's because I've worked with you that your passion for fundraising is infectious. What is it about fundraising that you love so much?
Look, I've told this story before, so people might get sick of hearing it, but I think it's really important is what makes me love my profession so much, but equally respect my profession, is the sense that when I was in that first philanthropic role, I had someone come up to me after having won a bursary, a small grant. And this grant system was created on a very first private donation that I received, and then other fundraising efforts created this bursary. And I remember that we were giving out laptop vouchers to people that needed them, and we were giving out book vouchers to students that didn't have the funds necessary or needed to buy their books for the semester. Like for me, it's something in terms of education that's as simple as books, or in this day and age, a laptop. How can you get through your education cycle and be the best version of yourself without them? So we created this bursary system to be able to grant people who didn't have the financial means the ability to access these grants. Now, we had a student who actually applied for a grant, but when you were reading out this application, you saw they were a worthy applicant based on, the means test and based on who they were and their potential, You then saw all they needed was a laptop charger and a replacement battery. So they didn't need the $500, and they didn't ask for the $500. They asked for, I think it was $170 by memory. And we, of course, gave it to this deserving applicant. The person came up to me and said, thank you. And they were crying in the middle of this quadrangle at university because I was so overwhelmed by the idea that they couldn't afford it, and we'd enabled that for them. And I just remember that story, and it stuck with me because I think, goodness, if I could do that, if I could be a part of that, imagine what my career could be like, and imagine all the people whose lives I could touch. And I think that I'm infectious about fundraising. I'm passionate about fundraising because not enough people remember that it's not just a job. We do get to actually help change people's lives, or at least give them the tools and the resources so they can uplift and change their own lives, which at the end of the day is more important. So what other career would you want where you can do that every day of your life?
Yeah, exactly. And you've worked in a few different sectors as well, other than that, healthcare, international development, human rights. What is it about your current role at the Asylum Seeker Resource Centre that keeps you going and makes you very passionate about what you're doing?
Yeah. Well, I think for me, when I started, and you had already been at the ASRC for a few months, you might remember that we were a pretty small team trying to raise some pretty lofty goals to support an organisation that's independent of government funding, and that equally is has tangible services that it supports people who are some of the most vulnerable and disenfranchised people in Australia right now. And without being too political, it's the type of people that just need a chance, just need an opportunity, who are people who are seeking safety for themselves and their family. Like, it's grounded in those base level things that we all deserve as human beings. And so I was really drawn to the role for that. But then going back to those lofty goals, I thought, wow, there's some ambition here. There's some real reach, and there's a real opportunity to throw things on their head a little bit and do things differently. And sure, we had some long hours, but gee, we had a lot of fun doing it too. And so that's what drew me to the ASRC, is that ability to work for an organisation that had lofty goals and had a small team, but had a real vision for what they wanted to do with those funds to transform people's lives. And and I look at what we're doing now, and we are. So
you started with the ASRC just over 2 years ago now?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, 2.5 years.
So when you came in, where did you see your role having the biggest impact, and yourself? Where did you see you having the biggest impact on the fundraising team?
I think for me, look, it was a really exciting opportunity in the sense that I had worked previously for organisations that had incredible reputations and still do to this day. And those organisations entrenched in me the value of systems and the value of project management and the value of documentation and the value of taking theoretical knowledge and applying it really well. And to this day, I'll always be grateful for those opportunities. But at the ASRC, it was a little bit different for me. I was able to take those things and apply them to something that was already pretty special, and pretty special by predecessors, by the leaders of the organisation, and by the public that support it. And for me, I saw my role as leveraging that and taking that to the sky is the limit type ideas, and obviously working with people like yourself and others who could help support that or be a part of that. And I like to call it like going full pelt, throwing the kitchen sink at it. That's what the ASRC was, and that's what I wanted to do at the ASRC, was take risks, be innovative, do things differently, not just for the sake of it, because it fitted with who we were and who our audience was and the people that were inspired to give to our cause. So I don't use the word leverage lightly when I say leverage all the things that we had in our armory, you might call it, to just, to do something different and raise funds for people that need it the most in a really urgent and often crisis-driven way.
Great. And I've seen, even just coming into the building the other day, the team's grown, the revenue's increased, and it's just gone from strength to strength. And what's been key to that success?
I would say excellent leadership. And what I mean by that is certainly not myself, although I hope that I have a good role to play in that, but certainly leadership for us with, the person that leads our overall stream of fundraising, marketing, communications, philanthropy and grants. That's what you need. You need a pinpoint, someone to bounce ideas off, someone to have honest conversations with. And we have that certainly. So it's not too far a stretch to say that you look at when a great leader in this sector started at our organisation, you saw a natural uplift. And I think having a good leader allowed me then to be the best fundraiser I could be, because I had my wings were let free and I could fly and take people with me. And I think the other thing is actually going back to those theoretical parts of fundraising, where you look at benchmarking and you look at investment and you look at where are your pressure points and where is good sustainable growth opportunities, and what do you do with those? And so for us, we actually really invested in doing that and invested in looking at where does further opportunity for growth lie, instead of just getting by and doing things on a bit of a cycle and just finishing one thing and moving on to the next. It was all about looking at our benchmarking and where was the next opportunity, the next frontier for us. And by doing that, we've been able to just take things, like you said, to that next level and grow income and grow the team, but not just grow it based on assumptions, grow it based on evidence and data and good decision making.
Yeah. So when you think back to when you started to when you look at it now, what are some really key things that have changed?
Yep. I would say that we have an ability to be a lot more learned with our investments that we make in retention, acquisition, and conversion. So we have a lot more evidence to around lead source attribution, around data collection. And by the way, it's not perfect yet, but we're making steps forward, and that's what's most important. We're starting to move forward to having an evidence base that allows us to stop some things, start others, but then also, as I said, throw the kitchen sink at something that might be working. And so that has allowed us to grow rapidly in terms of income generation by not spreading ourselves too thin and focusing more on certain aspects of what we do. And I would say the second component of that is actually building out a workforce that is highly skilled in that particular area. So you might remember that, when we were a smaller team, it was all people in, it was one in, all in. And that's great for a small organization, and I recognize that's important. But when you get larger and your goals and your targets get larger and the requirement of your beneficiaries is more complex, you need to be smart with how you work. And that's a credit to my colleagues, the other managers. It's a credit to our director to be able to start to get people to work, sometimes actually in silos, but in a good way, and then other times working as a larger team. And the results are there to prove that that's a good way to work. Don't let everyone be jack of all trades, but master at none. Make sure people are a master at least one.
Yeah, great. And you mentioned earlier about systems as well. What systems were missing or letting you down that you've improved significantly now?
Yeah, I would say project methodology and project documentation. And I think I class that as a system because project management is so important to the world of fundraising, because you don't have a large budget that you can spend willy-nilly. You don't have a lot of time. You need to be able to be responsive. You can't do all of those three things well unless you have a good project methodology. So project planning, consultation, implementation, campaign tactics that are applied, and then also obviously reporting on that programmatic activity and your tactics and your strategy. So unless you have that documented, and unless you have a good culture of team engagement and team discussion and an ability to be agile, you'll never have the right system down pat for being a good team. And I would say we are getting closer and closer every time we do that to mastering it, to the point where even we've had feedback that, hey, Alan, I think we've got too much documentation. And 2.5 years ago, no one would have ever said that. So I think that's really important with systems. And I think you'll get this a lot from people when everyone says their CRM is not great, it's not functioning, it's not doing what it should be. And to some extent, that's the same for us. But I've realized it's about making sure that your system isn't a roadblock. You use it in the best way possible. And when you can't, you work around it. Obviously, at a much higher level, you're always wanting to improve your systems, improve your CRM, your CMS, your capabilities across all your platforms. But when you can't and it's not possible, you don't stop. You have to keep going. So how do you find workarounds to get around that roadblock?
Yeah, great. I'm still yet to meet a fundraiser who's using a CRM system to its greatest capacity. So we'll still wait for the day to see that.
Yeah.
And it's now July here in Australia, so you'll probably still be feeling the battle scars of the tax appeal.
Yes, yeah.
How are you feeling now that it's all wrapped up?
Yeah, it was a really great experience for me that I probably haven't fully reflected on, in the sense that we've had a lot of change at the ASRC, as any organisation does. New staff who are in new roles, new staff who are in existing roles. And we realised that we came through to the winter appeal, and I was the only staff member working on the appeal who had been here before for a winter appeal, which is massive at the ASRC. A winter appeal and the telethon are two massive components of what we do. And it was just me with an incredible team, but all new. This is their first time around the bend. So I think for me, I feel really privileged to have worked with people who had to take on that challenge, who had to learn on their feet, who had to back themselves up and pick themselves up from some results that, to be honest, earlier in the year we hadn't been as what we wanted it to be, and it hadn't worked out the way we wanted it to be. But they picked themselves back up for what was our biggest moment of the year, and we had some really incredible results. So I'm really proud of them, and I feel really proud of myself in a way, as strange as that might be to say, that I got to be a part of their journey, which for someone who's passionate about fundraising like I am, to be able to take people on that journey and see them succeed, you can't get a better feeling than that, to be honest. So
yeah, great. Did you try anything new this year that you hadn't done previously?
We did, actually. There's the idea that direct mail is dead, and I hate that statement, but I sort of talk about it a fair bit to try and debunk it. We wanted to look at how direct mail could actually be something that people weren't just responding with a donation, they were responding to a behavioural question or a motivational question that allowed us to understand what their interest was in our programs. And what I mean by that is that this year we tried something which was where we had on the back of the donation form, we asked donors when they'd made their donation, to please turn over because you weren't done yet. And then we had this beautiful story about the Harvest of Hope, which is our community garden. And we had this community garden project of donated land where we would grow vegetables and fruit to put into our food bank to feed people seeking asylum, or at least if not to feed them, so they could take those fresh fruit and vegetables home with them to have a balanced diet for themselves and their families. And we actually said to people that this appeal, being significantly about the food work we do in the community food program, we want you to help plant a seed, because a seed represents growth. It represents new life. It represents new beginnings in a way. And your donation represents that for people seeking asylum. So we said to people, here's the Harvest of Hope, and here's 4 different seedlings that we actually, or 4 different vegetables, that we grow, and we grow year round at the ASRC Harvest of Hope. Tell us which seedling you'd like us to present or plant on your behalf. And we did that, and we got this beautiful response to it. And we asked people that we're actually going to cut out your seedling piece and plant it in the garden with a note that you'd like to give to people seeking asylum to really represent new life, new beginnings. And we got such an amazing and beautiful response to it. But from a data perspective, it was the single highest response we've ever had to direct mail, not just in terms of volume, but in terms of percentage response rate. And while we're actually still going through the numbers of it, we already know that it's reached that high threshold. So we're so happy to think that you can go back to basics sometimes and tell a good story and ask someone to do just something slightly different, and you'll get a response like never before.
Yeah. Innovation is such a big word, but it sounds like you're always seeking to do something different, shake things up a bit. Is that the case?
Yeah, I would say so. I read a really great article only yesterday, actually, and it was about the buzzwords of innovation and disruption, what that means. And there was a discussion about that we shouldn't almost try to innovate or disrupt the sector, the fundraising sector, that we should actually be focused on trying to do what we currently do better. And I would actually say that that's partially true. But what we should do, if you take out the buzz part of innovation and disruption, what those two things say to me is they say, take risks. Look to do something that people will respond to differently. Look to meet people's needs and their requirements and how they'd like to be engaged with or how they wouldn't like to be engaged with, and leverage that. And if that means new technology or different technology or doing things differently to how you might have before, take the opportunity to take that risk, because that is disruption to me. That is innovation. It's about using the tools you have or the technology you have, or maybe the technology you don't have but you want to build, and creating a new way of engaging people and seeing and testing if that's successful. So for us at the ASIC, we don't have endless amounts of funds to invest back into innovation just yet, or we don't have the time often to really think big picture. We have to just take small bits and small ideas and see what arsenal we have, or see what we can build to make a difference in the way we engage people. And for me, that's innovation. And I think the one thing that stands out is that it's about using the existing tools you have sometimes. So I'll give you an example that I'm actually really proud of. We recognize that we don't have the best onboarding journey for our regular donors, but they're really important to who we are, and they're really important to sustainable revenue. So we recognize that SMS is a really great tool for us, and that SMS and MMS is something that our donors respond to in droves. They respond to calls to donate. They respond to calls to action. They open up these SMSs, they read them, and often they don't unsubscribe. And with 20 to 25% of people opening an email these days, you have to find different ways to penetrate people's communication mindset. So we looked at how do we actually lower the level of 3 to 6 month attrition of regular donors, and even up to 1 year, through MMS as a part of the onboarding journey and the communications journey to bind people close to your organisation. So we did the simplest of things, which was me getting out my iPhone one day as a delivery truck of food. They were unloading the delivery truck in our garage of food on a pallet. I took a picture, uploaded it to MMS system, and then had a message to our donors, which was like, "Dear Jake, this is your compassion in action 2 months after you signed up to be a regular donor with the ASIC. We can't thank you enough. Here is the proof in the pudding of the work that you do and the way that you impact our organisation and impact people seeking asylum in a positive way. Thank you." Now, we've been doing this on and off with some testing groups, and the results so far have been really good in terms of what we believe is lowering our level of attrition, but heightening our level of engagement with regular donors, where it's communications where they're not getting another ask for a donation. It's not an email that's long and arduous they have to read. It's something that warms the heart. And for me, that in itself is innovation. It's using existing technology and trying to do something different to reach your end objective. So yeah, maybe I'll come back to you in 6 months' time and tell you what the final year looks like in terms of the test and whether we won out. So
yeah, great. But yeah, I've actually got about 3 questions that all stem off that, so I might lose a bit of my order here.
That's okay.
I guess, where do you look for innovation for yourself? Where are you looking for new ideas? And is there anyone that you try to emulate in your fundraising ability?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, because often people will say that look to the fundraising sector and look what your colleagues and your peers are doing. Read magazines, go to conferences, and they are all wonderful assets, particularly around benchmarking and what's best practice. But for me, what really stands out is if we had all the money in the world and we had disposable income that we could invest in these testing and product development, who would we look to? And you'd look to the retail sector, you'd look to the corporate sector, you'd look to startups, you'd look to impact innovation hubs, you'd look to those next frontier people who are either challenging the status quo because they have the resources and tools and skills to do it, or that's just their sole purpose. I look to those two groups. And the reason I look to them is because what can I take, what can I apply, knowing the resources and tools I do have, knowing the low level of expenditure I can invest in something, but what is it that I can take from those ideas or what they're trialing and then apply it back to what I do. And so there's so much to learn from those type of organizations. And, a really great example that I often say to people when it comes to digital fundraising is look at what the online retailers are doing. Look at what online clothing retailers are doing, who their sole purpose in business is online retail. See the way they engage their customers, see how they treat them, see how they surprise and delight them. What can we learn from that?
Yeah,
that's innovation.
That's true. Thinking outside the fundraising box, I think that's very valuable advice. Yeah. Where is the ASIC's, what's its greatest assets in terms of ROI and direct marketing channels? Has there been a shift over the years you've been there? Don't limit to just ASRC. I mean, Mater Foundation, whoever it might be.
It's an interesting question. Look, I think it's funny you mentioned multiple organisations. I think every organisation is different in terms of what their ROI is and where their greatest area of opportunity. I think it changes. I think some organisations have exceptional pipelines that develop into large, significant philanthropy, and that's where their greatest ROI exists. But it wouldn't exist without that pipeline development at the bottom of the funnel or the pyramid. So there's organisations like that. I think the ASRC, and one of the reasons I've never stayed at a job as long as I've stayed at the ASRC, and one of the reasons for that is that the sheer pool of people in the community who want to engage in this issue it's a priority for them. It's a topic of choice, if I may, in terms of why people want to support a particular charity. Refugees and the issue of people seeking asylum is up there as the number one issue for such a large portion of people, including our supporters. So the sheer volume of cash donors and potential regular donors and people that want to be a cash donor and then take part in a community event, that's a big component of who we are and what we do, and the ROI on it is really strong. So they're probably a little bit different to some organisations who see return on investment in other areas. But that really drives me and excites me, and I cherish that at the ASRC.
Yeah, great. And I don't even know how many times I say it, but people believe in the cause, but they don't necessarily always see the charity as the solution to that problem. But the ASRC does such a great job at being easily identified as the solution. And why is that, do you think?
Well, I think there's probably two answers to that question. And the first part is that I actually think the refugee sector as a whole is able to do that. Because they're so deeply ingrained in their people and their beneficiaries. So, not because the ASRC is obviously one organisation that's part of a much larger sector movement. And certainly, we are a large part of that pie, but there is organisations in every state and territory and nationally doing incredible work to make people seeking asylum visible and to make them have their voice amplified, and ultimately, I hope one day have people seeking asylum at the very centre of not just what we do, which I do believe we try our best to do, but that they have their own journey, their own story, they own their own activity. I think that's really important to make sure that the people with lived experience are front and centre, not just for the purpose of, say, fundraising, which we know is important to some extent, but just for the fact that they're the people who are the beneficiaries. They're the people who are experiencing this, and it's important that they tell their own story and they own their own story in the way they want to. So for me, that's why I think the ASRC is a little bit different, because we're pretty honest and transparent and upfront and a little bit raw around what we can tell and the stories we can tell. And I guess that's the second part to my answer to my question is I look at our CEO who founded the organisation. I look at the communications he puts up and the social media. Look, there's some who'll say that but you need this really robust and deep strategy to everything you do. And I would go, yes, I would agree with that for the most part. But there's something that's really beautiful about the idea of raw, organic content that's not perfect. And sometimes it's, the image might be a little bit fuzzy or the words may not be well written, and it's just there organically. And people get to see through the hoopla of it all, and there's a story, there's a person, there's an individual. And he's really created that culture. And I would say that that's important as well to our success.
Even coming into the ASRC the other month, there's an influential CEO, there's an influential fundraising director, there's an influential fundraising manager in yourself. I mean, how do you all get the best out of each other?
By being willing to disagree. Like everything I've just said about our CEO and what makes him really good in this space around building this beautiful, organic, large organisation that people connect with and resonate with, is that we can have challenging conversations where we do disagree and where we try to find a pathway forward. I actually think that's so important because if I'm not challenging my boss and she's not challenging me, and then together with other people, we're not challenging the status quo of who we are, and we're not sense checking ourselves, you'll never be as good as your last day. Your tomorrow will never be as good as it. So you have to continue to do that and be open-minded to those conversations and be willing to have sometimes what are difficult conversations. And I think that I'm happy to say that on camera because there's no point shying away from it. Not everything that we do is rosy and we don't always agree, but by having difficult conversations, you often end up in a better place than you started.
Yeah, and you must be willing to take the feedback as well, when someone disagrees with you. Just seems key because often people can take that quite negatively, but it doesn't seem to be the case, which is wonderful.
Oh, I think so. And I think the ASRC, being a large but also small organisation, it affords itself the opportunity of people having autonomy, but then also having the direct connection to other people who are decision makers. Having worked in large organizations who, again, I value that experience greatly, but you're one small fish in a very large pond. And to get to the right place in the pond to speak to the decision makers can often be so hard to navigate that you sometimes feel like it's not worth it. The beauty of the ASRC, and I would say, having spoken to other people in the refugee sector, the beauty of their organisations is that we can be agile, we can make quick decisions, we can connect with the right people, and there's no walls or barriers that stop you doing that. It's great. It's not perfect, but it's a good start.
Yeah, great. Back onto fundraising, and Christmas appeal will be the next big appeal for you. How far in advance do you launch, or even prepare and then launch?
It's a good question. I think some of the people who might watch this video down the track would be horrified at what I was to tell you, in the sense that we, being a small team, often our lead time has been really short for an appeal, or really short for a major campaign activity. But certainly we've recognised that to get us to the next level, next frontier, and to grow income, we have to be more organised. We have to make decisions earlier. We have to plan earlier and consult people earlier. So I would say that, as an example, we're already thinking about the Christmas appeal now. Whereas I remember 2 years ago, we would have looked at the Christmas appeal in early October. We would have started going, what are we going to do? And we wouldn't have had the right documentation. We wouldn't have had the right planning. And it doesn't mean that those results that we had shouldn't be celebrated. Some of them were pretty incredible in spite of ourselves. I'm prouder of the results as they come through more often, not because they're exceptionally larger, although in some case they are, which is wonderful, but more so because I know the process of how we got there. And I can be proud of that and proud of the team and their work.
Yeah, great. It's only probably 4 or 5 weeks ago since you had the ASRC telethon.
Yeah.
I was astounded by the result, actually. It was great, over $1.1 million raised.
Yeah.
And I just know for a fact, someone told me, that it was only a couple of years ago that it was nearly half of that. How does an event like that just go almost double in 2 years? How do you continue going from strength to strength?
Yeah, it's a great question, because the telethon is a really unique activity, and it's an activity I'm really proud of, and proud of the people that came before me to develop the activity and the event. It's the type of thing that I think cuts through with people, because it's one day in the year, and it's not that there's a specific thing that we're talking about in terms of need. There's not a specific narrative. It's really about the idea that come together on this day, World Refugee Day, to celebrate the strength and the resilience of people seeking asylum and just what they contribute to our society. And an important point to make is it's not that they need to contribute something exceptional to be a part of that celebration. It's just who they are and what value and beautiful diversity they bring, which all people seeking asylum and all refugees bring to our community. That day is a celebration of that. And I think that breaks it down for people. I know that for some people, it's the only time they'll donate to us in the year, and they donate every year to the telethon. I look forward to donating. So for me, it stands out as a day which brings people together. It unites people. It celebrates all of the best things about us, when often when it comes to refugees, all we're hearing is about the worst of Australia and the worst of policy. And it divides people a little bit, and we recognise that. But the telethon unites people, and it celebrates the most important people in the story, which is people with lived experience. So I think it's successful for those reasons. I think the ASRC brand is also very strong. It has an excellent share of voice around these type of activities. But more than anything, we're still raw and authentic. We run it through, lots of live streams through Facebook, lots of organic content, where our emails aren't perfect. The web platform is not whiz bang. It's nice, and it does a beautiful job, but it's not, it's not something we invest a lot of money into, because we know that that's not where our money is best spent. So yeah, there's a beauty in the madness of it all and the chaos of it all, and the idea that we just do it in our own backyard, and we make it happen out of nowhere for 16, 18 hours.
Yeah, great. And how big of a role do the celebrities that come in and help play?
Yeah, I would say that they have a really interesting role to play, in the sense that they do give the activity a bit of authority, that it's a genuine and that it's real, and that it's an important piece of that people should take notice of. And they bring it, but most importantly, they do that through their own channels and through new audiences. There's people who will donate to the telethon if it was a cat or a dog answering the phone, there's just people like that. I'm sure actually probably a lot of people call up to see if they could speak to a dog or a cat. But more importantly, they bring out new audiences, not so much the people that would already donate to us no matter what. So that's what I love about the telethon and about the ambassadors and the influencers. They reach out to new people with a message of hope, a message of human beings, a message of the ideal that everyone deserves to seek safety and seek shelter and start over and start a new life for themselves and their families. They amplify that message out to so many new people. So that's the real power of what they bring, and that's what we value so much about them. It's pretty incredible for people to take a stand on an issue that is divisive at the end of the day, and that not everyone agrees with, and people on very separate scales. So yeah, I'm really proud of the role our influencers play.
Yeah, no, it's a great day. But is it something you've found that's just continued to grow locally, regionally? I mean, not having a global partner, to fall back on as some of the other organisations, or is it just because their presence nationwide is growing?
Well, I certainly think the ASRC team, like their brand and marketing team, and people who do communications and things like that, have certainly helped grow the profile of ASRC more broadly as a trusted source of information, as a trusted organisation to do the right thing by people seeking asylum. And that builds equity and builds trust with the general public. But what I would say about the telethon is one of the reasons it has grown is that we have tried to get more sophisticated with our digital media, with our storytelling, with where we market the activity, because we have a really limited budget. The telethon this year raised over $1.1 million, as you said, but that was 9,313 donors. It was a huge amount of people nationwide and internationally who were chipping in what they could. And the activity grows because we see that there's more web traffic, there's more media hits. We had Channel 9 come down for the first year ever. We never thought that would occur, but it was a mainstream activity for them. So we're actually entering the mainstream. We're bringing the conversation into the mainstream, and it's a real credit to the people that, that's their skills that they bring to the table to do that. Certainly, I can't take credit for a lot of those things, and I never would. But what's most important is that we're breaking down silos and barriers that exist around this issue, and the telethon is a perfect day to do it. And I think that's why we've seen such exponential growth from when it started in 2016, and I think just under 250,000 was raised, and now 1.1 million.
Wow, I know, it's incredible. I mean, how do you break into mainstream? Do you have Channel 9 wanting to run down to the office, or do you have to reach out to them? Do you have to form that relationship?
Yeah, look, I think it's a little bit of two things. One is being perseverant and making sure that you never stop trying to put a positive message out there around this issue, because often there's so much negativity in media about it, whether it's media-owned negativity, or it's just them reporting on some of the, I guess, the sad and awful things that happen to people seeking asylum, particularly through poor policy. So what I love is that we as a second part of your question is that we break into mainstream media by talking to mainstream individuals about this issue and making it mainstream. Talk about human beings at the end of the day, and talk about the value of fundraising as part of changing people's lives. So we don't shy away from the fact that it's a fundraiser. We don't shy away from the fact that this amount of money can help us do great things so that we can help people seeking asylum, so that we can help our beneficiaries. And really, as you know, we have a lot of tangible products we can talk about, and we don't shy away from doing that. And we certainly wear our heart on our sleeves when we talk about the fact that we don't accept federal government funding, and that this money will make real change in people's lives.
Great. And the telethon falls in, I think it's the last 10 days of the June, the tax appeal. You've already got a huge tax appeal running, so many things riding on that. Is it an advantage or a disadvantage to have two such big campaigns running at the same time?
There's many ways that I've often thought it could be a disadvantage, but the data to this day, and again, going back to data and evidence, the data to this day tells me that there's no cannibalization to some extent. I'm sure there is, looking at it isolated, but overall, there's no cannibalization. It's tough for the team to do both activities at once, which is why it's probably important for me to always say that we will bring people into our work team in our community, either as volunteers or pro bono support, where we don't currently have the skill or we don't have the capacity around that skill. And just going back to that mainstream media piece, that's where we reach out to mainstream media professionals who can help us with that narrative and help us support the building of that story. So I think sort of in answering your question there, it's so important if you want to get through both the activities and make sure that it's not a risk of cannibalizing each other and it's not a risk of the team burning out, is don't ever be afraid to put your hand up and say, hey, I think we need some help here. That's how we get through those two activities. Good communication, good planning, and honesty about what it is that we need, who do we need to make that happen, and if we don't have it internally, what do we do to build the right team around both those activities.
Yeah. It's certainly a busy time at the ASRC when all that's happening.
It is, yeah. It's an exciting time though too.
It is.
It's a lot of fun.
Especially the telethon. It's a wonderful day. The other big event that ASRC runs is the Run for Refugees, a peer-to-peer event.
Yep.
How does that fit into the calendar, and how do you continually get active participants for that?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question because the Run for Refugees is a event that's at an interesting stage of its life cycle. It was one of the first, things that we ever did in the community more than 12 years ago now. And it's raised more than $2 million in that time, where we essentially joined onto a major sporting event in Melbourne as a charity that people could sign up to register from. And it grew to the point where not only did we raise more than 30%, in some cases, of that overall charity campaign's fundraising total, we were always the number one charity for I think 5 or 6 years running, and we were the largest team in the entire event. So it grew through this idea of being a charity campaign where people could wear their support on their back. They could wear it on their sleeve. They could say loud and proud, I stand with refugees. I run with refugees. I walk with refugees. But most importantly, I care about this issue, and I'm going to say it loud and proud in an event of 30,000 people. So it was great, and a great activity for many years, where it was a big piece of our income puzzle, and it had great return on investment, and it fed the pipeline into other areas really well, even if we didn't realize it was doing so. I think we're at an interesting juncture for Run for Refugees, in the sense that as our organisation has grown, it has not. It's stabilised though, and we've now gone, okay, well, what's the value proposition of this event and campaign? Do we want to continue it? And the answer is yes, of course we do. It has a role to play. But we're now branching out into other states. So we have a Run for Refugees program across the country, working with our current supporters about how they might like to extend their support. But the budget for it hasn't gone up. We're not asking to raise more money. We're looking at it as a pipeline development activity. We're looking at it as something that still raises a wonderful amount of money that will do incredible things, and we're really grateful for that. But where is the next frontier in events for us? Where is the next frontier in peer-to-peer fundraising? We know that our supporters want to do more with us. So what opportunities do we put in front of them outside of this one opportunity that's at a different stage in its life cycle, to engage them in our community.
Yeah, great. Always innovating by the sounds of it.
Always thinking about what comes ahead.
Yeah, great. Well, since you've started at the ASRC, the FIA has recognised the ASRC as having the best donor renewal campaign, best emergency special project, best special events campaign for 2018 as a national finalist.
Yeah.
For yourself, you were the Australian Young Fundraiser of the Year this year. How did that feel and what went into winning that?
Yeah, so a really interesting question because there was a lot of build-up, I guess, from some of my peers in the sector around this award and whether I was going to win it, which was really I'm grateful for and very chuffed to have won it. But again, without trying to sound a little bit cliche, I was really proud of the fact that our team got acknowledgement. I will come back to the Young Fundraiser of the Year award in a tick because it is important and I'm grateful for it. But there's something about a team being acknowledged and a team being seen for their work and people hearing what they do and going, that is excellent. That is something you should be proud of because we're proud of it too. And so, you've rattled off a couple of the awards we were national finalists for, and the telethon has been nominated every year since it started as a national finalist for Best Special Event. So there's something really special about that our team gets recognised. And I love the idea that team gets recognised no matter who might be in the team, And I think that says something about the team that we have grown. So really chuffed for that. And I hope that maybe this year we can take out one of the big ones. But I think for me, the Young Fundraiser of the Year award was really special because it was a validation of the idea that, 8 years ago when I could have become a lawyer, potentially, or I could have become, a communications professional or someone working in, I was doing accounting and commerce at one time at university before I changed. So maybe I wanted to be an accountant or, an investment banker, who knows? But I didn't choose those things. I chose to be a fundraiser. And that was a risk. It was a risk with my family, my friends, my university peers. And this award validated the idea that I'd made the right decision. And I certainly am one who dances to the beat of my own drum in all that I do. And so I wasn't looking for the validation, but when it came around really nicely. So for me, the award was that. And it was also a chance to thank people that helped me get there and acknowledge their component they played in my success, which you don't often get the chance to do that in our sector. And it's really important to step back and go, I'm doing some good work and that work is impactful and it's helping change lives. And it's okay to own that. It's not a bad thing. I think the one thing that the fundraising sector and the people who work in this incredible sector, often we don't do is we don't know our own worth. We don't know what we bring to the table well enough, or at least if we do, we don't acknowledge it. So for me, this award helped do that. And of course, I got to go overseas as well for an incredible trip. And that was incredible. So
wonderful. And people will say, Alan won it because of this. But why do you think you won that?
That's an interesting question. No one has asked me that before. Well, part of me says I don't know why I won it. And the reason I say that is because I looked at the other people who were nominated. One of them actually really close, not just a colleague of mine, but also a friend. And I think she's exceptional. And I think other people are in there are really talented young fundraisers. So it was just great to be nominated amongst them and be celebrating young professionals, But I would say perhaps I won it because based on the criteria, I'm a state committee member of FIA. I have been on the boards of a number of small community groups. I volunteer my time at a range of different organisations or for causes I care about outside of work. Certainly, there's been an element of having had success at the ASRC and other organisations, and that success has been recognised. And I would say that I'm deeply ingrained in my sector from a professional development perspective, an educational perspective. I'm ingrained and invested in the fundraiser I am in the future as much as I am in the fundraiser I am today. And that's lastly, I really care so much about my career that I went and got my CFRE. And I hope that actually counts for something. I hope that getting your professional credential in fundraising means something. So maybe that's why I won. But you probably have to ask the judging panel why I won. Because definitely I was amongst a really great group of peers.
Oh, wonderful. The CFRE, it's not easy, but it's also something to show that you're really aspiring, engaged and talented, experienced fundraiser. I always see the tag associated to people. How has that helped develop you as a fundraiser?
Well, I think partly it comes back to that word validation, which again, I didn't think I realized I needed, but perhaps I did. The idea that it validates your credentials and it validates your skill set and the theoretical knowledge you apply to fundraising. I didn't mention before, deliberately, the idea that I won the Young Fundraiser of the Year because of the income growth we've had at the ASRC in fundraising, but it has been exponential, upwards of 40 to 50% year on year. And the reason I say it in answering your question here is that the CFRE tells me that it's not a fluke, those results. They didn't just happen. Sure, there was a range of factors that made them happen, but my theoretical knowledge, my skill set, the way I've applied my fundraising education, and the knowledge I have, and having passed the test that I had to do, which was really arduous actually, and so it should be, it tells me that I actually know what I'm talking about when it comes to fundraising. Now, I don't know everything and I'm constantly learning, but I know enough and I know something. And that's what's important to me, is to go, I'm on the right track here. And the CFRE offers that. But most importantly, the CFRE stands for something really important publicly. The CFRE stands for the idea that I'm a certified fundraising executive. And then if you're my colleague and my peer, you can trust that I'm invested in my sector, I'm invested in my education, and I'm, when tested against certain criteria, I'm learned in my sector. But it also tells donors that I take my ethical standards around fundraising high. I take them seriously. It tells donors and partners and people in the community that I can be trusted ethically, responsibly, that I care for the sustainability of our sector, and that at all times I will do the right thing by the donor community. So it's sort of like a badge of, like a tick of approval, a badge of approval to wear at certain times. And I think in a sector which has fluctuating levels of trust, that can be really important.
Yeah, that's a really good answer. And how are these outside commitments? You're on the board for a few organisations and on the committee, and how have these helped you develop as a fundraiser?
Well, I've done study around governance and non-profit management, which I really valued the opportunity to do. And that was a number of years ago, and I've now been able to take that and apply it to something, and apply it to good governance in other organisations, which helps me understand the governance of the organisation I work in. So for me, working in a range of other organisations, either as a volunteer board member, as a committee member, it keeps you on your toes. It stress tests your ideas. It makes you understand differing viewpoints and opinions, which only makes you, as not just a fundraiser, but as a professional individual who either manages a team or leads a team or has a range of stakeholders they need to engage with. It helps you be the best version of yourself you can be when you do each of those activities.
Yeah, great. So just quickly onto leadership now.
Yeah.
You manage a team. How do you get the best out of them?
It's been a real challenge. I gravitate naturally towards leadership, but I recognize there's a difference between leadership and management. So for me, when I was younger, I liked the idea that I was everyone's best friend. I liked the idea that I could get along with everyone and we'd have these beautiful relationships, and it was all hunky-dory. Being a good manager has told me that that won't always be the case, and you might sometimes have to have hard conversations with people, productive conversations, but hard all the same, and that sometimes people might disappoint you or you might disappoint them, and you need to work through that together and have open levels of communication. Being a great manager and getting the best out of my team means that I need to continue to learn more about management, put it into practice, see where the levers are, where it does and doesn't work, and make sure that I take people's well-being into account. I take their skill set into account. And when I know more about who they are and how they act and what they apply to their role, make sure that together we're heading in the right direction, and we're heading together in a way that may not be the way I wanted it perfectly or how I would do it. And it may not be exactly how they would do it, but it might meet somewhere in the middle. Yeah. So that's how I get the best out of my team. And the most important thing that my bosses continue to do for me is she's allowed me to take risks. She's allowed me to try new things. So I have this mantra of doing that with my team and pushing them in that direction. And sometimes that push can be a hard one or a soft one. It can be uncomfortable, but often we get a good result out of it. And that's where professional development comes in, and making sure that if people have a skills gap and they identify that skills gap, or you provide the space and the environment in which they feel safe to put their hand up and say it, then make sure you respect them enough and respect their honesty to help capacity build them and help take them in the direction they want to be.
Yeah, great. Yeah. And you mentioned as the fundraising director and someone who plays a really important part in developing you even today as to the manager that you are.
Yeah.
What advice does she give you?
Well, I would say that she has set me up really well to challenge my own thoughts and ideas. And bring things back down to basics and don't complicate things too much sometimes. So she's always will challenge assumptions and stress test things, and she'll do that to me as well. And that's really important. But equally, what she's taught me about management and being a good leader is that sometimes it's to step away and know that you can't control everything and you don't need to be involved in everything and you don't want to micromanage people, but step away and let them, in a way, figure it out for themselves, but be there for them to bounce ideas off you and be approachable and be open to that. And she's always been that for me, Kath, which has meant that I've realised that's what I need to be for my team in my own way. And equally what I would say is that throughout each of my organisations, I've had leaders or managers, and particularly at Mater Foundation as well, who encourage the idea that leadership isn't just something that just happens, and it takes time, and it's not for everyone, and that's okay too. But that you need to practice at it, and practice can sometimes make perfect, or close to perfect. So yeah, I'd say that they've done that, and then I've been able to take that and apply that to the next level with Kath, which I'm really grateful for.
And what are you striving for as a fundraiser? Where do you want to be in 5 to 10 years?
Look, it's funny when I get asked this question because people go, gee, that's a bit of a brash answer. And the reason is that like any other career, I have career ambition. I have goals. First and foremost is to be the best fundraiser that I can be in the sense of best practice and doing things really well and doing things, whether it be data-driven, whether it be technology, whether it be output, whether it be income growth. The idea of having the best theoretical knowledge, the best applied knowledge, the best evidence base, to be able to take all of that and then throw the kitchen sink at it, as I said, and produce some really great results that people go, wow. And the idea behind that is that the more I can do that, the more I can help people. I'll never be a doctor. My mother, I'm sure, would kill me if I went back to university, but I'll never be that person who's on the front line, but this is what I can do and this is how I can change lives. So I'm really ambitious to be the best version of myself that I can be, both as a leader, a manager, and as a fundraiser. But I guess the other part in terms of 5 years is that I'd love to be leading my own fundraising team. I'm so passionate about fundraising, and I love the staff I get to work with. I love uplifting them and seeing them create the results that they desire. And like any other career, I'm drawn towards leadership. I'm drawn towards capacity building people and working with them. And for me, that's the next frontier for me. And I'm still young, but I don't mind. I don't care about my age too much, besides the fact that it's the sort of thing that means I've got hopefully a long time in the sector ahead of me. But I feel like I'm ready for that next jump, and I'm open enough and confident enough to say that. Doesn't mean I'll know everything. Doesn't mean I'll get everything right, but I'm going to give it a good crack.
Yeah, you may be young, Alan, but you're very wise and you've just shared so much great information. And we're down to the very last question. So if you've got any more advice still in there, what's your final piece of advice to inspire and fulfill fundraisers to make a positive impact and create change for a better world?
I would say the first and foremost for me is know who you are and know what you're grounded in. Being grounded is really important because it's a center point you'll always come back to when times are challenging and times are tough, and that you may not know how to navigate or steer the ship or what role you play in doing so. So always come back to who you are. I've said a couple of times during this interview that I dance to the beat of my own drum. I'm a bit of a different individual. I know who I am. I know what I want. And that grounds me, I have my values base. I have my ethical base. I have what I'm comfortable with. I have what I'm not comfortable with. And I know the type of output that I want to have and to some extent the reputation that I want to have. And that helps me in my decision making. It helps me challenge myself. It helps me be the best version of a fundraising professional for myself, for my family who care about what I do, for my friends, for the organizations I work for and those that I've worked for in the past. But most importantly, it allows me to, and this is the advice part, take risks, do things differently, or if I'm not going to do things differently, do them as well as you can possibly do them. Don't just settle for the status quo. So there are three things for me that make good fundraisers, that help us make change, that help us see the best versions of ourselves and then see the best versions of our beneficiaries as well. So that would be my advice. And that would be me saying that this is an incredible profession. It's a sustainable profession. It's a worthy profession that should attract and should retain incredible people because they are changing lives no matter what sector it might be in. And I'm just proud to be a part of it.
Yeah, fantastic answer. Alan, thank you.
Thanks, mate.